The old lighthouse stood sentinel on the rocky coast of Maine, its beam cutting through the thick fog that rolled in from the Atlantic. For decades, it had guided ships safely to harbor, but tonight its light revealed something far more sinister. Detective Mara Kincaid squinted through the mist, her eyes fixed on the dark shape sprawled at the base of the tower. As she approached, the details came into focus. A man's body, tangled in seaweed and fishing line, lay face down on the wet rocks. But it wasn't the corpse that made Mara's breath catch in her throat. It was the intricate pattern carved into the victim's back, a compass rose, its points indicating the cardinal directions with chilling precision. Mara had seen this before, 15 years ago, when she was just a rookie cop. The mariner had called him a serial killer who terrorized the New England coast, leaving a trail of bodies marked with nautical symbols. He'd vanished without a trace, becoming a local legend whispered about in seaside taverns. Now, it seemed he was back. As the local police secured the scene, Mara's mind raced. She'd built her career on solving impossible cases, earning a reputation as a brilliant but unorthodox detective. But this case had haunted her for years, the one that got away. Now she had a second chance, but at what cost? The victim was identified as James Hawthorne, a local fisherman with a reputation for hard drinking and even harder living. Initial reports suggested he'd been dead for less than 24 hours. As Mara dug deeper, she found that Hawthorne had recently come into a large sum of money, far more than his meager catch could explain. Over the next few days, Mara immersed herself in the investigation. She pored over old case files, re-examining every detail of the mariner's previous crimes. The similarities were undeniable: the nautical theme, the precision of the carvings, the choice of victims from the fringes of society. But something felt off. The new killing lacked the almost artistic quality of the originals. It was sloppier, more rushed. Was this truly the work of the mariner, or someone trying to imitate his style? Mara's instincts led her to the Salty Dog, a rundown bar frequented by the local fishing community. As she nursed a drink at the bar, she overheard whispered conversations about the treasure and the map. Her interest piqued. She began to weave herself into the fabric of the town, a skill she'd honed over years of undercover work. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Rumors swirled of a lost pirate treasure, hidden somewhere along the coast. It was said that Hawthorne had found an old map, a secret he'd guarded jealously until his death. Suddenly, the influx of money made sense. He'd likely found a small part of the treasure and was searching for the rest. As Mara dug deeper, she discovered a web of rivalries and old grudges within the fishing community. Hawthorne had made enemies, lots of them. But would any of them go so far as to kill him and frame it as the work of a long-dormant serial killer? The investigation took an unexpected turn when Mara received an anonymous tip, leading her to an abandoned cannery on the outskirts of town. Inside, she found a makeshift workshop filled with nautical tools and half-finished carvings. This wasn't the lair of a seasoned killer, but someone desperately trying to recreate the mariner's work. Before Mara could process what she'd found, a noise from behind startled her. She spun around, coming face to face with Eddie Grange, a young man she'd interviewed earlier in the week. His eyes were wild with fear and something else, a desperate sort of greed. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Eddie had discovered Hawthorne's secret, killed him for the map, and tried to disguise it as the work of the mariner. But why go to such elaborate lengths? As Mara talked Eddie down, the full story emerged. The treasure was real, but it wasn't gold or jewels. It was evidence, logbooks and manifests dating back centuries, revealing a history of smuggling and corruption that implicated some of the town's most prominent families, including Eddie's own. Hawthorne had been using this information to blackmail people, explaining his sudden wealth. Eddie, desperate to protect his family's reputation, had killed him and tried to pin it on a ghost from the past. The case was solved, but it left Mara with more questions than answers. The real mariner was still out there somewhere, and beneath the quaint exterior of this coastal town lay a history darker than she could have imagined. As she stood on the lighthouse keeper's walk, watching the sun set over the Atlantic, Mara felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. She'd caught a killer, but she knew this was just the beginning. The mariner case was open again, and this time she was determined to see it through to the end. The next few weeks saw Mara delving deep into the town's history. She pored over old records, conducted interviews with long-time residents, and slowly began to piece together a timeline of the area's criminal past. The more she learned, the more she realized that the mariner killings were just the tip of a very large, very dark iceberg. Local legends spoke of shipwrecks and smugglers' caves, of fortunes made and lost on the stormy seas. But beneath the romantic tales of piracy lay a more insidious truth. For generations, certain families had controlled the flow of illegal goods through the town, building empires on the backs of those less fortunate. Mara's investigation led her to the Blackwell family, whose shipping company had dominated the local economy for over a century. On the surface, they were pillars of the community, generous philanthropists who had shaped the town's development. But as Mara dug deeper, she began to suspect that their wealth and influence had much darker origins. Her suspicions were confirmed when she managed to track down one of the original Mariner victims' families. The victim, a dock worker named Tommy Collins, had been on the verge of exposing a major smuggling operation just before his death. The official investigation at the time had overlooked this crucial detail, focusing instead on the sensational aspects of the serial killer angle. As Mara connected the dots, a chilling pattern emerged. Each of the Mariner's victims had, in some way, posed a threat to the town's criminal underbelly. The killer hadn't chosen them at random. He'd been cleaning house, eliminating potential whistleblowers while cultivating a persona that would keep investigators looking in the wrong direction. The realization hit Mara like a punch to the gut. The Mariner wasn't just a serial killer. He was a hired gun, a tool used by the town's elite to protect their interests. And if she was right, he might still be out there, waiting to strike again if the need arose. Armed with this new understanding, Mara began to look at the town's residents in a new light. Who among them could be the Mariner? It would have to be someone with intimate knowledge of the sea, someone who could move about the docks without raising suspicion, someone with the strength to overpower his victims and the skill to carve those intricate symbols. Her investigation led her to focus on three primary suspects: the grizzled harbor master with a mysterious past, the reclusive lighthouse keeper who seemed to know everyone's secrets, and the charming local historian whose knowledge of the town's darker history seemed a little too comprehensive. Each of these men had connections to the Blackwell family and had been in town during both the original killings and the recent copycat murder. Mara knew she was getting close, but she also realized that she was putting herself in grave danger. If the Mariner was still active, and if he was indeed working for the town's hidden power brokers, then her investigation was a direct threat to decades of carefully guarded secrets. As if to confirm her fears, Mara began to notice she was being followed. Shadowy figures lurked at the edges of her vision, disappearing whenever she tried to get a closer look. Anonymous threats were left on her doorstep, warning her to drop the case or face the consequences. But Mara was not one to be intimidated. Instead of backing down, she decided to set a trap. Using her contacts in the media, she leaked information about a fictional witness who was ready to come forward with damning evidence. The bait was set. Now all she had to do was wait and see who would bite. The response came swifter and more violently than she had anticipated. Late one stormy night, as Mara staked out the docks, she spotted a figure moving with purpose towards an abandoned warehouse. She followed at a distance, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the warehouse, Mara found herself face to face with the true Mariner. To her shock, it wasn't any of her suspects, but someone she had overlooked entirely: Sarah Blackwell, the young heiress to the Blackwell fortune. Sarah had been carrying on her family's dark legacy, using the Mariner persona to protect their interests just as her father and grandfather had done before her. A fierce struggle ensued, with Sarah revealing a strength and skill that belied her elegant appearance. As they fought among crates and fishing nets, Sarah spat out the truth: how her family had built their empire on blood and secrets, how the Mariner had been their most effective tool for generations. Just when it seemed Sarah might gain the upper hand, Mara managed to turn the tables. With a well-placed strike, she sent Sarah crashing into a stack of crates. As the dust settled, Mara stood over her defeated foe, the last in a long line of killers who had haunted this coast. In the aftermath of Sarah's arrest, the full extent of the Blackwell family's crimes came to light. The town was shaken to its core as decades of corruption and murder were exposed. Many of the old families fell from grace, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of the truth. For Mara, the case brought a bittersweet sense of closure. She had finally solved the mystery that had haunted her for 15 years, but the revelations had forever changed her view of the quaint coastal town she had come to love. As she stood on the lighthouse keeper's walk one last time, watching the sun set over the Atlantic, Mara reflected on the nature of secrets and the power they held. She had lifted the veil on this town's dark past, but she knew that there were other secrets out there, other mysteries waiting to be solved. With a deep breath of salty air, Mara made a decision. She would not return to her old life in the city. Instead, she would stay here, in this town of shadows and whispers, continuing to shine a light on the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic communities. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sky, a reminder of the thin line between safe harbor and treacherous waters. Mara smiled to herself, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In a world full of secrets, she would be a seeker of truth, no matter where that search might lead her.